Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another Ask Leo live session. We'll be looking at today turning on multi-factor or two-factor authentication. At least in a Microsoft account, I have one of those ready to go. Possibly we'll also look at a Google account. And if we have even more time, I might actually touch briefly on enabling it in a LastPass account. All three of those do support multi-factor authentication. They support multiple types of multi-factor authentication. And as I think I've mentioned before, multi-factor authentication it goes by both terms, two-factor and multi-factor. The bottom line is that you have multiple forms of proof that you are who you say you are that are required when you log in. So normally when we think of just logging in with a username and password, that's really only one factor. It is something you know. You know your username and you know your password. Two-factor authentication adds basically something you have. So what that usually boils down to is some kind of proof that you are in possession of something physical. And I'll show you some of the examples that are associated with that. Something you have, like I said, something physical. That also tends to spill over into something you have access to, such as an alternate email address or another kind of account. And then we say multi-factor because in fact that can still be extended. There's a third level that often gets added in even more highly secure scenarios, and that's something you are, which typically boils down to biometrics. Now, biometrics can be used as by itself as a second factor, but when we start looking at multi-factor authentication, you can actually have all three things required. Something you know, a password, something you have, which we will prove, and then something you are, which would be something that would be a fingerprint or a retinal scan or Face ID or something like that. So what I want to do is start with a Microsoft account and go through what it means to set up two-factor authentication there. I'm only going to go for two factors. We'll set up two-factor authentication in my example Hotmail account and talk about some of the various forms that second factor can take. So here is, let's see, my Windows 10 home machine. And in fact, I already have my Microsoft account home ready to go. The way that I get to this, by the way, let me show you that really quickly, since most people aren't really familiar with firing up the account page directly, is when you go to something like Outlook.com and you click on your icon, usually it's an avatar. It can be the first letters of your email address. It can be an image that you uploaded. I uploaded an image here that says Ask Leo. Click on that. Click on My Account. And now you can see we're at the same place we were on this tab, so I'll make that one go away. My Account is where this kind of information is kept. And the place we want to go down to here is Protect Your Account, because that's what two-factor authentication is all about. It does request you to enter a password again. You're about to make security settings to your account, and it's important that only you be able to do so. So even though we're already logged in, it's going to ask you to confirm your password yet again. In this case, you can see that LastPass, which I have enabled on this machine, has already entered it in for me, so all I really need to do is click Sign In. There's a variety of things that you can do on the security page. I'm going to focus specifically on more security options and then two-step verification. I want to be clear about that. There are a lot of different phrases. We've already seen two-factor and multi-factor. Two-step verification is really just another synonym for the same security measure. So you can see I've already got it turned on. This is, if I do that, I can go ahead and turn it off. If I set up two-step verification, it will now walk me through the process of setting it up for the first time. So there are multiple ways of doing this. I will walk through here using the Microsoft Authenticator app so that we're all staying within Microsoft properties to make this happen. And in fact, I already have the app installed on my mobile phone. You can use a different Authenticator app, and for my live accounts, my personal accounts, I do use Authy. That's A-U-T-H-Y. It is an account that mimics the Google Authenticator. All of these authentication apps, and there are several of them, all have a common syntax, a common function that's actually compatible across almost all of them. So Authy is one that's very convenient because it's a great way to manage multiple accounts across multiple devices. The Google Authenticator is the canonical reference implementation of this particular protocol. There's a LastPass Authenticator. The Microsoft Authenticator will do this as well. And there are even some other third-party authenticators that all basically work the same way. Now, if I go ahead, I see I'm going to get it now. I don't really need to get it now since I already have it on my phone. But if you didn't already have it on your smartphone, we'll talk about some non-smartphone approaches here in a minute. But if you don't already have the app on your smartphone, this is how you get it, either on your Android device or on your Apple device. Now, the reason it's actually not doing anything, so basically all we said was get the app, and it has now gone to the point where it's saying install the Microsoft Authenticator and sign into your account. So by signing into the account on my phone, they will then automatically associate the two. So I'm going to fire up that app. Let me bring my camera back full screen so you can see this. I'm going to try and show you what I'm seeing on the phone when I do this. So you can see it saying, let's add your first account. So the account that I'm adding is the account that I'm looking at here. It's asking if it's a personal account, a work or school account, or some other kind of account. What we're adding here will be our personal Microsoft account. And we have the option of signing in with Microsoft or scanning a QR code. QR codes can be handy. I'm not seeing an easy way on the desktop, on the website that we're visiting right now to make that happen. So I'm going to go ahead and just sign in with Microsoft. On my phone, that means that I'm adding an account. I have to actually choose one. My live account, my regular account is there. I need to add this example account to what I'm doing, which means typing. Making sure that I type it correctly. It's askleoexample@hotmail.com in case you're wondering. And I'm normally fairly protective of my email addresses just to avoid them getting out into the wild and flooding me with spam. Fortunately, this account is the definition of a throwaway account. I rarely pay attention to it. But one of the first things I have to do when I set up for one of these example sessions is, in fact, clear out all the spam that has shown up in my inbox, because there is so much of it. I'm going to go ahead and bring the screen back up so that we can see if anything changes here. It's actually asking me to verify my identity, and it's doing that. Let me bring you back up full screen so you can see this. It's actually going to send a code to one of the alternate email addresses associated with this account. Now, the alternate email addresses themselves are, in a sense, a form of two-factor authentication themselves. And in fact, if you've ever done an account recovery where you've forgotten your password, it's your second alternate email address to which they will send things like a recovery code. Once again, to prove not that you know something or are something, but rather that you have something, and that have is that you have access to this other account. Now I need to take a quick look and see. This is sending a recovery code to one of my live accounts, one of my real accounts, that I actually do pay attention to periodically. The way that I deal with email, there's actually an inherent delay, which is unfortunate. I'll take this opportunity to remind you that if you have questions throughout the live session here today, please enter them in the comments. I would love to answer any questions for you in real time, both the subject matter. Ideally, if it's about two-factor authentication, we'll hop right on that. If there's something confusing about what I'm doing on the screen, let me know. But I'm absolutely open to all sorts of other questions that may come up through this session as well. Dealing with two-factor authentication is the jumping-off point for today's live session. Still waiting for that second factor, that code to get sent to my alternate email address. We've come to expect email to be almost instantaneous, and for a wide variety of reasons, it is frequently not. The reasons associated with my email address I completely understand, because I know the path, and there is actually a place in the path to my email where there is an inherent delay of anywhere from half a minute to a minute or so. So we'll go ahead and continue to wait for that. For the record, what's happening on my phone is it is simply asking me to enter the code that it's about to, or that it will have sent to my email address. Also, no, I can't do that. This is the exciting part about doing things live and in real time. That is the risk of doing things live, is that sometimes things take a little while. Do I have a preferred Authenticator app? Stephen MCA1 asks. Do I have a preferred Authenticator app? I've only ever used Google Authenticator. Absolutely. I actually strongly prefer Authy, A-U-T-H-Y. The reason is actually very simple. With the Google Authenticator, you can set up the Authenticator on one device. You have multiple accounts, you can have lots and lots of accounts, but your Authenticator is tied to a specific device like your phone. If you lose your phone, or even more mundanely, if you get a new phone, which, as it turns out, I'm probably on the cusp of doing, then you have this problem of how to move the authentication tokens from one device to another. And Authy basically is set up for that. What you do is you actually also end up with an account with Authy, and they encrypt and back up your authentication tokens. What that means is that you can install Authy on more than one device, including, say, another phone or even a PC. I have it installed on my PC and on my laptop for when I travel. so that whenever you add a new authentication token, it automatically, after some synchronization, it automatically appears on the other devices as well. So that if I lose my phone, I can still log in using the same token just by firing up Authy on my laptop or on another device. Now, on the surface, that feels like it's a security issue because it basically makes your tokens available in more than one place. So somebody could steal your phone and you might not go through the steps of having to disable your two-factor authentication, but that's a responsibility that I'm willing to take because it definitely adds security in the sense that I can log in securely using two-factor from any number of different devices. The solution that I took in the past, prior to using Authy, by the way, is to, when an application or when a service provides you with a QR code, that basically is how you associate an authenticator with a particular service or a particular login. I screen cap the QR code and save that away so that if I were to lose my phone or when I get a new phone, I can simply rescan that QR code and set up the same linkage with the service. So that's an alternative if you're uncomfortable with the Authy approach. But I've been very, very, very happy with Authy and having it maintain my QR codes for me. And this is taking significantly longer than I would have expected. So what we're going to do instead, then, I'm going to give up on this approach. And what I'm going to do instead is hit next over here on the where we've been waiting. So we installed the Microsoft Authenticator. We tried to sign into the app, and it's actually still waiting for a code to arrive that hasn't arrived yet. In the real world, if this weren't a live demonstration, I'd keep waiting. I'd probably wait for a good 10, 15, maybe 30 minutes for that code to arrive, just because email can be that weird at times. But for this example, I'm going to go ahead and hit next. I haven't finished yet. That is correct. So what we're going to do is cancel. We don't sync any of these devices, so we click next. And we haven't actually set up. Interesting. It is, we went through this process and we set it up to protect with two-step verification, but in fact, we never successfully associated an app. Now, identity verification apps are what this Outlook app is supposedly all about. We'll go ahead through this other path and set up an identity verification app. You can see that this brings us to exactly the same place we were before. This time, I'm going to set up using a different Authenticator app. Here, you can see now that there is a QR code being displayed. That is the QR code that will associate my account with a specific identification app. And I am going to, I'm backing out of my app here so that I can. So if you remember, this should be big enough on the small screen. If you remember, it was asking if I was going to use a Microsoft by signing into the account on this phone or scan using a QR code. What I'm going to do this time instead is scan the QR code. And it's going to be impossible for me to really show it to you. The phone is actually turned into a very strange little camera with an area that you are supposed to target the QR code. And a QR code was scanned, and now the app is showing me a number that would be my identification number. Verify that the pairing was successful by entering a code below. The code that it's asking for is the code that is currently being shown on my phone, which in the time since I started talking and just now, has changed. So the whole theory behind security codes and apps, and let me bring this full screen again so it's a little bit easier to see. The whole idea here is that this number that's being displayed by the security app on my phone will be different every 30 seconds, and it is impossible for you or I, or pretty much anybody, to guess or predict what the next number in the sequence is. In fact, we are unable to guess any of the future numbers associated with this app, this pairing. The only places that know what the next number is or what the number is the app on my specific phone and the service into which I'm logging in. So what that means is that my ability to provide the correct number when asked proves that I am in possession of my phone. It proves that I have my second factor. Danish asking about recovering a Facebook account. Unfortunately, the only advice I can give you on Facebook accounts is to follow the Facebook account recovery procedure. I have no magic backdoor. I have no way to make things happen other than to follow and carefully follow that procedure. So a quick diversion there for Dinesh so he gets an answer. So we have now turned on two-factor authentication for this account. And the next time I log in, or anytime I log in on a device that I haven't logged into before, it will ask me, show me, or tell me the current code on your Authenticator device to prove that you are in possession of the device. That will be required in addition to the password. The reason I point out that it only will ask for that second factor on devices on which you haven't previously logged in is a lot of people are worried, do I have to do this every time I log in? And the answer is no, of course not. When you log in, you have the option of saying, remember this machine. Depending on the service you're using, you can say just remember this machine, or some will say remember this machine for 30 days. But for that period of time on that specific machine, often that specific browser on that specific machine, you will not have to prove your identity beyond knowing your user account name and password. The reason that is so still incredibly secure is that the folks that are trying to hack into your account don't have access to your machine. They do not have a machine on which they have successfully logged into your account. They may, at worst, have your account name and password, but with two-factor authentication turned on, the first time they try to log in from any machine, it will require them to enter in the second factor, which they don't have. That's why two-factor authentication is so incredibly powerful. Now, you can, of course, set up an additional identity verification app. You can run through this process again if you like. So if you wanted to have both Google Authenticator and Authy and the Microsoft tool that I'm running all connected and connected separately, so they're not all sharing the same authentication codes, you can do that. That's not the approach that I take. As I was mentioning, I use Authy. So when I do go through this process of scanning a QR code, everything gets remembered automatically across the devices on which I have Authy installed. App passwords, I'm going to skip over for just a second. I want to scan down or skip down right away to recovery codes. I'm going to replace the recovery codes for this account. Again, I'm about to do something that is secure and sensitive. So it's confirming that somebody didn't just walk up to my machine and enter and try to do this. Apparently it wants me to do that before it even lets me do this. So here's my new recovery code. This is important. And whenever you set up two-factor authentication, regardless of the service you use, regardless of any of the other settings that you might associate with your account, I want you to then immediately go set yourself a recovery code. What you do with this recovery code is you save it. You copy paste it, you print it as they suggest here. I can select it and I can of course do a copy. I can then throw it into a text document that I can save securely some other way. In my case, I save these things on an encrypted drive. I actually use Boxcryptor. In the past, I used things like TrueCrypt or VeraCrypt. But essentially, the idea here is that this code acts as a replacement second factor, if you will, should you ever actually lose your true second factor. So let's say, for example, this device, right? I have, actually, I'm not showing you I'm actually not showing you the screen. That would be helpful. What we're looking at, I'm sorry about that. What I did, I'm actually going to go ahead and do this again. So we ended up back here at two-step verification, and we were able to scan a QR code. I hope things were set properly for that to happen. But I scanned a QR code, and the phone took it, and that is now the what's driving my second factor on the phone. What I want you to do that immediately after having set something like that up is scroll down here in the Microsoft account settings to replace or set up a recovery code. In my case, I needed to log in again. In your case, you may not. You'll probably need to log in again if you haven't done it for a little while. The idea here, as I was saying, is that the recovery code is something you can print or copy, paste, and save somewhere secure. If you ever lose my phone, as I was leading up to, if I ever lose my phone, right now, this is the only place I have a second factor. If I lose this phone, I cannot log into my account, perhaps, but I run the risk of not being able to log into my account. The recovery code is your safety net. It is something that you save securely for an emergency such as having lost your second factor. When you try to log in and it asks for your second factor, you will be either giving this recovery code in its place, or you will have an option to say, I don't have my second factor. It will ask you for your recovery code. Microsoft, as you can tell, this looks a lot like a product key, and I'm sure it uses the same encryption mechanism. It is not a product key. It's just their standard way of displaying what is essentially a very long, complex password that they set and save for you that you get to use exactly once in an emergency. They strongly recommend that you don't store your recovery code on a device. Naked, that statement by itself is true. You should not store the recovery code on a device. I do, but as I said, I encrypt it first. I save it somewhere that is secure so that it's not something that somebody can just stumble on. But this is how you would regain access to your account should you not be able to use your second factor. Now, very often, so let's go ahead and we'll go ahead and save that. Let's assume that I saved it somewhere safe. If I now, the other thing that I want to make sure you set up are the list of phone numbers or emails that you use to sign in. This is that alternate email address and that alternate, another approach to two-factor authentication. By having an alternate email address configured, and you may not by default, or by having a phone number associated with your account, and you may not by default, you may be able to use that as an alternate mechanism to log in should you not have your second factor available. Now, as you can see, I have 2 email addresses currently associated with this account. One of them is the account's email address itself, askleoexample@hotmail.com. That's the primary alias, and it's not something you can remove from the account because it is the account. It's how the account is identified. AskLeoAlias@Outlook.com, that's actually something that I set up some time ago in Outlook.com. Outlook.com supports aliases to your inbox. Not going to cover that today. What I am going to do is, so these are the accounts that are available. Let's see, identity verification, app passwords. So you want to make sure that these aliases or any other email addresses associated with your account are enabled so that you could use them, should you need to log in. We've got turned on two-step verification. We have our identity verification app passwords, and security keys. Setting up a security key. A security key, hang on, I'm going to step away because I've actually got it hanging on the wall here. By security key, what they mean is one of these. This is a YubiKey. There are several made by different manufacturers, and it can be the second factor associated with your account. It acts in various ways depending on the application asking for you to prove that it exists. The short version is that when the app asks you for a second factor, it will ask specifically for any security key that you've configured. I'm going to go ahead and step ahead here so that you can see what it's asking you to do. There are two different kinds. USB, actually this one does both, but it's obviously USB. It's something that you stick into a USB port. When you associate it, what happens is you press on the button that is here in the middle of the key, and it actually enters some information into your computer. I believe there's a private protocol, but in the worst case, you can actually plug this in, fire up Notepad, hit the button, and it acts as a virtual keyboard, and you can see what looks like a random string of numbers get entered. That is the confirmation that you have the key in your possession. Like the Authenticator app that we just did, your key is associated with your account. The information that's stored on your key is unique to the key. Every key is different. And when you associate your key with the account, like this step is about to do, then what you are doing is setting up a permanent and unique link to this specific key. It becomes your second factor. For people that like physical keys, like you can see, I've got this one on a small carabiner so I can carry it with me. For people that like physical keys, it is extremely secure. You can add more than one, and I know of at least one reader who suggests you always get two. You associate two, and you store one safely in a safe, for example, so that in case you ever lose the first one, you always have the second one to fall back on. It's very similar to my recommendation that you set up a recovery code and store that in a safe place. I'm not going to actually associate that here today simply because the machine you're looking at is a virtual machine, and we have to jump through a couple of hoops to make my physical USB port for this key actually associate with the virtual machine. But that's what you would do if you did a virtual, if you used a security key. Let's see, Windows Hello is the fingerprint reader on your machine. If you have one, I'm not going to touch on that right now. Managing your sign-in methods basically is the same thing. We talked about recovery codes, and we're not going to go ahead and so trusted devices are simply those machines that it thinks you have logged in on. If, for example, I've signed in on my laptop, I've jumped through the two-factor authentication hoop to make sure that I don't need to enter two-factor authentication over and over again. If I then lose that laptop, there are two approaches to dealing with that. One is to immediately come here and remove all the trusted devices associated with your account, which means that every device will, the next time you log in with your account, require that you enter that second factor for two-factor authentication. The other thing, of course, that we more often recommend is that you change your password. That is also a good option. And in my recommendation, honestly, is that you do both. Let's see. So we've talked about that. Let's look real quick. I'm going to go back to my account. Oops. I did not want to change my picture. Thank you very much. Going back to the security homepage. I was hoping to see earlier, of course, when I ran through this exercise, I had the ability to add additional email addresses, alternate email addresses. And that doesn't seem to be one of the options I'm seeing here today. And yeah, I was hoping that managing my sign-in methods would help as well. Hang on for just a second while I confirm. Don't want to change my password. Security contact info. That's what I wanted. Sorry for that little foray. So I've mentioned a couple of times that when you don't have your second factor, or in some cases when the service wants some additional verification that you are who you say you are, they will accept your password, but then require that you enter a code sent to an alternate email address. These are those alternate email addresses. So I'm going to go ahead and add one. Now you can add either a phone number or an email address. I'm actually going to do both here right now. We'll start with the alternate email address. And I'm going to use, well, you can see I've been practicing, leo@askleo.com, an email address that I think you're all familiar with. Oh, and it's already there. I already have done this. So these are email addresses that are alternate email addresses. The list we were looking at before, askleo example at hotmail.com and askleo alias at outlook.com, are the email addresses that actually are used by the account, but these are the alternate email addresses. You can have multiples of these. When you get the request for a security number sent to your alternate email address, it may send them to more than one of these, or it may allow you to select one of them to send to. It depends on the service. I believe Microsoft lets you select which one. You'll notice that these accounts are also labeled as will receive alerts. So for example, as you add second factor authentication devices to a machine, or especially if you remove a second factor authentication option from an account, the system will send an alert message to make sure that you know that this happened in case somebody unauthorized does this without your permission. The other thing then that I do want to do though is I do want to go ahead, and I am going to go ahead and actually add a phone number. And the phone number that I'm going to add may surprise you. I have to see if I can bring it up here real quick. Not the number itself, and I honestly don't care if you know this number, because it's not a number that I ever answer. And it is texting that that number, a code that I have to enter, and that actually came in already, 4823. And I have now added a text messaging number to my account. And you can see it says won't receive alerts. Those are options. You can see change alert options. You could have it text you every time something happens on your account. The magic behind that specific number, and the reason I'm bringing it up right now, is that that is actually a Google Voice number. You'll notice I didn't grab my phone to receive the SMS. If you set up a Google Voice number, which is still free, you can use that as an SMS target for any of the services that you might be interested in using that for. I happen to use it for my voicemail. I've got a couple of them. I never answer that number. It always goes directly to voicemail, and any text messages that I get received by that number get ignored. But you can see that it's great for the scenario where we're using today, where I can set up this example. One of the reasons I bring that up specifically is because it is a situation where the most common lockout situation involving two-factor authentication for people that are traveling, especially when they're traveling overseas, when they're overseas, this is one of the times that Microsoft will automatically trigger a request for additional validation that you are who you say you are. If you've enabled two-factor authentication, then that will be enough. If you've got the Authenticator app that you're using as your second factor, that should be enough because that does not require connectivity. It simply requires that your phone, your device that has that second factor, have the right time. It's all time-based. But as long as it's close on time, then that second factor you enter from the mobile device app will work. However, not everybody does that. Not everybody has two-factor authentication enabled. The second factor then that Microsoft goes to is your alternate email addresses, the ones that we've set here, or in some cases, the SMS number that we've set here. If you can't access those email accounts, or you don't have access to your phone because you've traveled overseas and are outside of your carrier's area, you can't log into your account. I bring this up specifically because this Google Voice number, if I could log into my Google number, or if I can log into my Google account that is associated with this, I can receive SMS text messages, and I can then use those as my second factor for things like my Microsoft account, as I've done here. So we now have a couple of different email addresses we can use when logging in. We have security info, I think this is, yeah, that's just adding more phone numbers, more email addresses if you want to, and we can get ourselves alerted. Let's do something dramatic. Let's go ahead and, I actually didn't mean to do that. You can see that I always go via Outlook.com, and you can see that we got notifications that things were happening to my account. Security info was added, so you want to make sure that if you get one of these, that if it's legit, comes from the Microsoft folks, make sure that what's happening is something that you instigated. Do not click on the links in the email. Instead, go to the account yourself by going to Outlook.com in your browser or accounts.microsoft.com in your browser and navigating to the security settings there. This is an email that can be easily spoofed, and if they trick you into clicking on a link that isn't what you think it is, you could actually make things worse instead of better. So I'm going to go ahead and archive both of those because I don't need them. And then I'm actually going to sign out of this account because I want to then show you what it means to sign in with two-factor authentication. We have signed out. I'm going to sign in. Takes me back to the sign in page. It remembers my email address. This can be a browser setting if you like. In my case, I suspect it's LastPass filling it in for me. I'll click Next. LastPass again has filled in my password for me, which as always is convenient, but this is where you would type in the password if you did not have a password vault. and it didn't require a second factor. That's important. I wanted to point that out to you because that's not an objection, right? That's the fact that you don't have to use a second factor every time you log into your machine it's not an issue because it remembers that you did log in at least once successfully on this machine. What I'm going to do now is, let's see, what's the best way to do this? Let's try, let's see, what is it? Control, sorry, there we go, clear browsing data. I'm actually going to clear everything. There aren't any of those. I'm not going to worry about those. And I'm going to clear it for all time. So what I've done is I've cleared all the cookies in my browser. I've also cleared the cache and a bunch of other things. But cookies are how these services remember that you were previously logged in. So in theory, if I'm right, when I go to sign in again now, I will once again, oh, it remembered, interesting. It did remember my username and password that I'd gone this far. That's fascinating. Normally, what I was expecting, and I'll let you just be honest about it, I was expecting for it to remember that I had not, I was expecting it to ask me for my email address and password once again. What I'm going to do is close the browser and fire this up again. We're going to go to, I'm hoping this will show you the more normal sign-in process. Sign in. No, it is remembering something. And I'm not sure where it's remembering because I'm pretty sure I cleared all that stuff out. At any rate, clearly the browser is remembering something that I wasn't expecting it to remember. But normally what would happen in a case like this is you would enter your email address and your password, and you would then enter the code that's displayed on the authentication device, which in my case is for the next 15 seconds. That, if you can see it there, I'm going to let that roll over to a different number just because I do want to click Don't Ask Me Again on this device. This is the magic. This is the way you prevent it from asking you for a second factor over and over and over again. Now that the number has changed, we'll hit 795.099, and I would then be logged in. I'm not going to verify. Having trouble, sign in another way. I want to explain or show you what happens if you don't have your second factor. You can see here that it has 4 different ways that it will accept as verification that I am who I say I am. The verification code from my app, which is what I just said I don't have. I could have it text me. Well, let's say that I don't have that available. I could have it email me, the 2 email addresses that I have listed as alternate email addresses for this account, or I have a code. This is the code that you received. If I don't have any of these, they'll go through a couple of additional steps to verify who I am. I don't want to go through them now for fear of messing things up with my account. But normally, one of the things that would happen here is you would have the ability to confirm your identity by using the recovery code that we created earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and close this again, fire it up again. Actually, I'm going to fire up a different browser just so that we can see if the login sequence is more of what I'm expecting. This one remembered me completely, so I'm suspecting we're going to have the same scenario that we had before. All time, cached everything. We're not going, oh, it was probably sync in the browser that was doing it, so this actually does stand a better chance. Sync in the browser is actually something for another day. It's an interesting technique that allows you to save a number of different things across browsers. Chrome has had it forever. So Outlook.com will sign in, and now it's asking for the email address. I have one. The password, LastPass again, is remembering it for me. I'll go ahead and have it keep me signed in. And now it's asking me for the code. I will say, go ahead, don't ask me again on this device. The code currently showing on my device is 5959434, and we're logged in successfully using two-factor authentication. That was a lot about two-factor authentication specifically for Microsoft. Since we're closing in on an hour, I don't want to necessarily go down into the details for either Gmail or LastPass, because that could take a significant more amount of time. I will absolutely, if I don't already, I'll have articles on the topic. The important thing that I want to leave you with in talking about two-factor authentication is it is by far the single most important way to secure your account. Even if your password is ever disclosed accidentally or through a breach, the person that has your password cannot log in to your account unless they have your second factor. They won't. Your second factor will be on your mobile phone. It'll be the key in your pocket. It'll be the alternate email address that you have access to. Set those up. Make sure that they're set up, and make sure, especially in the case of alternate email addresses and phone numbers, make sure that they are set up and that they are kept current. One of the very common ways I hear about people losing access to their account is that they set them up years ago with an alternate email address that they no longer have access to. They lose access to their account, they forget their password. There's nothing we can do. So make sure you avail yourself of all of the options available in whatever service you have. Primary, alternate email addresses, SMS, alternate phone numbers, two-factor authentication, multiple types of two-factor authentication, multiple devices if that's what you want to secure yourself with, a recovery code. Make sure you've got a recovery code set up, saved, and squirreled away somewhere safe. And that way, especially for those all-important accounts, you may get your password hacked. It could happen. You won't care because nobody will be able to get into your account without your second factor. So with that, are there any questions left for us before I bring this one to a close? Like I've said, we did end up spending a lot of time talking about Microsoft's implementation of two-factor authentication, specifically since Microsoft accounts are now more often than not Windows accounts. They're the accounts you use to log into Windows. This has become even more important. This level of security has become even more important for Microsoft accounts than ever before. So if you think an account isn't important, then I would beg you to reconsider that thinking for your Microsoft account in particular. You're using it to log into your machine. If you forget your password, you're going to want these backup mechanisms to be able to log in. If you can't log into your machine, you can always go online to the account settings pages that we've been demonstrating here to reset your password and actually regain access to the machine you can't log into. Let's see. I'm just looking at other questions here. I've already talked about the Authy app, and just so you know what it looks like, let me bring it up real quick. It is something that I have on my home screen. I use it that often. But here, in fact, let's see. Let's go ahead and bring me back. This is just one page worth of the accounts that I have associated in my my Authenticator. In fact, I think I've got like 3 screenfuls of accounts that all support two-factor authentication. LastPass would be another one that I would strongly recommend. Again, whatever password vault you happen to use, make sure that if they offer something like two-factor authentication, you enable it, because password vaults, I know password vaults make people nervous in some cases. Two-factor authentication is another approach to reducing that level of concern. Even if somebody gets your vault master password, they will not be able to log into your vault and decrypt its contents. But yes, I'm using it for LastPass, TeamViewer, Dropbox, Google, Microsoft, of course, Twitter. I have a Proton Mail account. Amazon. You can, in fact, enable two-factor authentication on your Amazon account to prevent people from logging in or as you and buying things on your dime. Let's see. I have Boxcryptor. You know that I use Boxcryptor to encrypt the files that I use in the cloud. Boxcryptor supports two-factor authentication. One of the domain registrars that I use supports two-factor authentication. Evernote, privacy.com, a number of other things. So it's a very, very widely accepted and now widely standardized way of additionally securing your account, and I strongly recommend that you enable it across all the accounts you consider even marginally important. So with that, I'm not seeing any additional questions come in. I want to thank you all for being here today. I hope you found this helpful. It was a little awkward in places, as these things sometimes are, such as the price of doing things live, but that's why I'm doing these practice sessions as well. So with that, I wish you all the best. Stay safe, stay secure, stay healthy, and as always, be kind, be well. I'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.